So I've come up against a bit of an unusual problem. Um, my knitting habit has got out of hand. Um, so there's a bit of a sort of chat within the knitting community about are you a product knitter or a process knitter? And I think it's a bit of an arbitrary distinction, but and the answer is probably most people are invested in both. Um, the idea is one person, like a product knitter, is knitting because they want the thing that the knitting can make, and so they're almost like suffering through the knitting process in order to get the thing at the end. And the other is a process knitter, so they are not so much worrying about what they're making, but they are just knitting for the joy of the kinesthetic movement of it. And it turns out at least part of me is a process knitter. I realised sort of within the last year or so that knitting had become quite important to me. And I think part of that is because I used it so much when I was feeling very, very ill, and now I'm a little bit less ill. I'm still kind of using it as a way to regulate things. Whether I'm neurodivergently stimming, whether I'm managing anxiety or just kind of other emotions, either way, it kind of helps as a little bit of a cope sometimes. I find that it gets my stimulation levels about right. So if I'm just sitting watching TV, I can feel a bit restless. If I'm watching TV and knitting, then I can sort of feel more regulated. And that's the same for any other times when I'm doing knitting on public transport or whatever. So that kind of was all fine for a long time. And I gave up buying clothes a few years ago. I've made annual updates on it, and that was kind of coming into 2020. That was mostly an environmental thing, and also I was doing a bit of a decluttering journey. And I said I'm not gonna buy any clothes. I'm just like including from charity shops, or I bought some online fast fashion. I'd got quite a lot that I was starting to get from the ultra fast fashion places, from Shein, and that sort of thing. And I learnt about why that was a problem, and I finally felt like I was in a position to make a decision about myself, having done some other therapy bits and stuff, which I may talk about at some point in the future. So I decided that I was going to stop buying clothes, and I was just going to make them. And it takes longer to make clothes. Well, it takes more effort to make clothes, and that's part of the point. It's so fast if you get good. Like if you have a sewing machine, and this is just based on my own experiences and the complexity of patterns that I'm doing, you can make tiny little accessories within like hours. And I made a pair of trousers from so I slightly modified a pattern that I had that I'd already cut out. I made them like within 5 hours. It's like I couldn't have. If I'd like travelled to town and back and bought them, it almost would have taken longer than just making them. So it doesn't necessarily slow everything down. And knitting obviously takes a lot longer than sewing, going stitch by stitch. Even something like a sort of hat that's this size, this is for another video, even sort of making a hat like this is still, you're looking at kind of 6 to 8 hours of work, which is obviously a lot longer than either like cutting and sewing a single seam across the top to make a hat, or just buying one. Obviously, there's like more effort that goes into it. But it turns out when you knit every second of the day, or like when you've integrated into so many other areas of your life, so if you're on public transport, if you're, I mean, I knit in pubs, I knit at gigs, I'll knit when I'm waiting for stuff, I'll knit at other people's houses. It really kind of adds up. And I remember saying to my friend in I think 2021, I'd knit my first jumper in 2018. In 2017, I finished it on New Year's Day in 2018. I finished my first jumper, and in 2021, I was like, oh, imagine how cute it would be if you had like a whole wardrobe full of your own handmade jumpers. Thinking this was some sort of far off, distant fairy tale land. And I've done it. I've achieved that. My wardrobe is overflowing, even with not buying anything, and even with doing occasional little bits of decluttering, I am making so much more than I want to part with. Um, if I was someone that was really like ruthless with parting with stuff, then maybe, but I'm not that kind of person, and I don't really necessarily want to be either, because that just creates this fast fashion type churn, even if I'm just my own sort of sweatshop labourer, even if I'm sort of producing exclusively my own clothing. So that's put me into a bit of a pickle because, yeah, like I said, even with knitting that is slow, I'm still kind of accumulating a lot, and I think part of the process is around therapy, part of the process is around stopping and exploring fast fashion and stuff like that, is that I'd gone from that kind of scarcity mindset to the kind of abundancy mindset. And that's something else that I've seen like a lot of people do and talk about when they're in things like no buys. And it's then really made me understand kind of how much I need and how much I don't need. And I feel like I'm pretty saturated for things like knitted jumpers and hats and stuff like that. And because I know how, I can make stuff. So if I do feel like there is a gap in my life or my wardrobe, or I lose a couple of hats and then I'm running pretty low, then I can make some more. It's not a problem. And that kind of thing I'm happy with. But I do think that I need to make some sort of active effort to work out how I can still enjoy knitting as a hobby and enjoy it for what it is and for what it gives my life, but without ending up in this situation where I am just fully drowning in jumpers. And I don't know, like I've only got one torso. I can only wear like one or two at a time. So I concocted 3 plans, 3 different possibilities, and I'm going to kind of go through a bit of the pros and cons of all of them, because it might be that you're in this kind of similar thing where you've ended up with lots of making, and this might be really helpful for someone else. Or it might just be kind of entertaining or fun accountability if I come back maybe further towards the end of 2025, and I'll have some kind of stuff to share about how it's gone. So, idea one is part of the thing that knitting does for me is that it helps me pass the time. So if I've got at the moment I've not been working in sort of standard employment, so I kind of end up with long pieces of unstructured time. So it gives me something to do during that time, and it also allows me to stack with my other kind of general activities to keep me at the kind of right levels of stimulation. So one of the ways that I can fix that is, if I'm not in a situation where what I want to do is knitting, what if I want to do is something, then I should put some of my energies into a different kind of creative project. Like knitting absorbs a lot of my creativity, thinking of different shapes and patterns, and just sort of integrating with that. Because I do quite a lot of designs, I kind of freeform stuff, I'll look at patterns and find stuff that way, and it kind of gives that creativity. But I can engage with that other ways. So I've been enjoying creative writing, I've been wanting to do more with music, and then there are other just general pastime things that could be learning, either sort of learning with music, learning with language, or just kind of learning in general. Reading is another thing that I enjoy doing. So I've got like reading as well as writing, and writing and music I can't necessarily do while I'm knitting, so that kind of gives that full bodies of stimulation. I'm sure I could if I really tried, but they're not things that easily go, like because the music that I want to do, I've decided I'm going to learn bass, or I'm having a go at learning bass, whatever. Sometimes I play some guitar, I'm kind of interested in learning the keyboard, and all of those things. Like I could knit and sing at the same time, but I think I'd struggle with any kind of instrument playing and knitting at the same time, especially as a beginner instrument player. And typing to write while knitting isn't efficient for either of our activities. They both are just things that require hands. Unless I really speed up my foot knitting process, but I don't think I've got the concentration for both of those at the same time. So the good thing about that is that can take up the just doing something to pass the time. It's just a different way to pass the time, and it's something a little bit more variety. You get if you start engaging in different things, then you just kind of become kind of more skilled and more kind of well-rounded, and then you've kind of got more skills and resources to draw upon. And that's something that I want for myself. I like the idea of jack of all trades kind of approaches to things, or actually I've been doing quite well in a number of things, so we can say master of multiple trades, polymath, whatever kind of term that I want to pompously assign to myself. Exciting. Hey, I'm a polymath. Let other people call you that. So that's kind of something that I'm keen to pursue. I'm keen to become the kind of person that other people can describe as a multi-talented polymath. The downside and difficulty of that is that while I am in no way anywhere near as ill as I had been in the past couple of years with burnout, knitting is something that requires very little of me. So if I'm feeling really tired, physically or mentally, I have to be really, really, really tired before I can't knit. And because every other one of those processes is newer to me, they all require more mental energy. And I guess sort of music as well requires a little bit more physical energy, and there's sort of a bit more of a setup process, so the activation to get up and do it is higher. It's no bad thing for me to do that activation and to get into the habit of it, but it does mean that it's going to be harder to integrate. And also knitting is very, very, very portable. So I can easily put the project that I'm working on right now, as I'm saying that I'm knitting too much, I can easily put this into a bag. It's much harder to pick up a keyboard and play it on the bus without being like the most annoying. I guess language learning could happen. My friend had Duolingo open, and it's reminded me that Duolingo exists and I want to play with it sometimes. So it's a lot harder necessarily to do things that aren't knitting in kind of those spaces. One of the things I've started doing a little bit is yarn spinning. I've got a drop spindle in my bag, and then that's just something else which can also slow down my knitting process. I'm having a go at making my first hand spun sweater, and that's a lot slower going than if I was just using commercially prepared yarn that I had available in stash. So that's going to be one of the things that I do, trying to make it an extra effort to perhaps change my habits around like knitting being the thing that I just kind of grab, that it's the thing I do because it's the thing I do, to make it slightly more intentionally carved out time, to intentionally then carve out time for other creative activities, which I do want to do, and I am starting to kind of like I was getting ideas about like knitting and making clothes faster than I could make them, like because they just come through into your brain, and I am now starting to get that around things like writing and things like music, that I'm getting creative ideas quicker than I can kind of get them out. So that is method number one. Method number two is one that you might be familiar with if you know a knitter, particularly someone that's a lot older. So I've joined a local knitting group while I was sort of part of it, and then I'm not, and then I've kind of gone back for a little bit of it. There's a knitting group that happens in the local library, particularly on like a Wednesday afternoon, and where I'm not currently in traditional work. I've gone along a couple of times, and a lot of the people there that are kind of very much grandma ages, because it's on a Wednesday afternoon, they knit exclusively for charity, or they do sort of quite a lot of charity knitting, and there's various different campaigns that come through. And so if one is desirous to just knit for the joy of knitting and as a method of engaging in charity work, that can be something you can do. I do engage in a lot of charity work. I'm not necessarily feeling like that's the thing that's missing from my life, but it is a nice thing to do. And if my situation changes and I do end up doing kind of more traditional work, that might be then that I end up doing less kind of volunteering, because I don't necessarily have the same time periods available. So that might be something that I do as a way of doing charity work, or it might just be as a way of having kind of a default project or two to go back to. So if you know somebody that knits, or you've got like a colleague or an auntie or someone, they might exclusively make hats for premature babies. Like that might be all that they do every time they pick up their knitting needles, and that's what they make. And it's a charitable cause maybe that they're passionate about. And there's always kind of campaigns for stuff going round. So there was a while ago where it was twiddle muffs, which were these little things designed to go into care homes for the old people there, particularly those that had kind of anxiety around dementia. So essentially, to be a stim like knitting is for me. One of the things that older people can sometimes do when they're distressed is they'll pull up their clothes and then they undress themselves, and it's not necessarily because they're warm or they want to not wear their clothes and things like that. It's just because they want something to fiddle with. So they'll fiddle with the buttons on their clothes and they can end up undressing themselves sort of publicly, and that may or may not be embarrassing for them or people around them, and it's just generally unpleasant. So one of the things that was made were these little tubes, knitted tubes, and you just sew on stuff that could be fiddled with. So cotton reels, buttons, zips, things that could be fiddled with. So you've got somewhere to keep your hands, way to keep your hands warm, and just stuff to play with. So there's that goes round. There's like the little paired bears for like when the babies don't come home. That you sort of leave one with the child and keep one with the parents, and it's a way to kind of remain connected. Like after that, and sort of general other things as well for different knitted gifts. I think there was some stuff going out to Gaza and that sort of thing, like teddies for children that had teddies for children that had been displaced, and they kind of went out to sort of the refugee sort of areas and things like that. So lots of stuff that's happening all the time. Balaclavas for sailors, I think was one of the things that someone mentioned. Knitted boobs for people that need prosthetics after mastectomy. So there's lots and lots of stuff that's going on. I'm thinking, like, knowing myself, I would not want to make exclusively premature hats for babies or blankets, which is what my mum and grandma used to do. They would just knit blankets and send them out, and they would all just be garter stitch squares over and over again, and I honestly couldn't think of anything more boring. But one of the things that I did enjoy was every now and then just doing a square. Like if I wanted to knit or I had just a little bit of yarn and it was kind of suitable for that, just occasionally throw in a square. But it definitely wouldn't satisfy my creative urge if that was all I was doing within knitting. That would be very boring and quite a sad existence for me personally. Although other people find that it gives them exactly what they want. So I'm thinking that could be something that I could incorporate if I can find a project which feels good, that I can kind of do maybe squares and blankets, maybe small blankets, maybe hats, maybe some sort of baby charity that I can kind of link up with, maybe just jump on whatever's going round, maybe twiddle muffs. But I'm thinking that might be quite a nice thing to just kind of have a box somewhere in the house and just throw in stuff when I've made it. And then option number 3 is that I make things for other people. I noticed last year that of the things that I made, of the 85 things I made last year, some were small, some were big. A lot of them were gifts. A lot of things were things that I were making for other people. And I think part of that was because it's that, like, I don't need anything. I don't need a jumper. I don't need more hats. I don't need more scarves. I'm already well saturated for what I need. But then I find a lot of the time with gift knitting, you knit for the people in your life that you consider knit worthy. And it kind of tends to be the same people over and over. So, like, everything would go to Sarah and B and all of that. And I've already started with it, and I just put up a post on my Facebook saying, you want me to knit you something? Here you go. So I'm going to be asking people for the price of yarn plus a labour cost, and I've set that labour cost criminally low. And it's just because I want to knit for my friends. I want people to be able to afford stuff. So I've had a request come through for a jumper already, and I think that's going to be quite a nice thing. So, and it's also a way to engage in the, albeit already pretty cheap hobby, for free as well. So if I'm getting other people to buy the yarn, it's a way to kind of just hobby without costing any money. And I think it's quite a nice method of doing it. I'm not thinking it's going to be any kind of big earner. I'm saying things like a hat might be a tenner, and like I just said, it'd take like 6 to 8 hours to make it. So the hourly rate is not good. But if I was going to knit anyway, then I think it's quite a nice thing. And because I'm not trying to make a living off it. It's sort of just little bits of pocket money. It's the yarn fund. But I guess if people are buying the yarn, maybe it's the CDs fund or something else like that, that it can kind of just support other things. So yeah, those are my 3 methods that I am thinking of using. So method number 1 is to just do things that aren't knitting, other creative projects. Method number 2 is to engage in some of the charity knitting work, in kind of in between other projects. And number 3 is to do commissions for people. And fingers crossed that that works out. I think I'd be quite disappointed if I got to a position where I felt like I had to give up knitting entirely. And I don't want it to become something that is stressful. I have given up creative hobbies before, and that has also been fine. So despite the fact that my nails are done at the moment and probably not visible, there's a like crocodile crackle glaze on it. So I have done my nails for today. I had an event. But like I used to do nail art, and I used to do really big complicated designs, and then I kind of stopped doing that, and now every now and then I paint my nails. Every now and then I might do nail art, but it's not a project for me anymore. I used to do a lot of cupcake making, and now I still know how to bake, but it's not like a hobby anymore. It's sort of just a thing that I might do every now and then. Pole dancing went on the back burner for a long time. I've just gone back. So I think I'm kind of okay with some hobbies leaving my life, but I feel like knitting's become such a, I don't know, it's become such a big part of my life at the moment, as part of the kind of self-sufficiency, anti-fast fashion thing. It's like really helped be part of that and make sure that I have the clothes that I want and need, and kind of add things to my wardrobe and get that kind of dopamine hit and stuff. But it's getting to the point where now it's not about making new stuff and showing off the new thing that I made. It's just like the stress of needing to squash another thing into a drawer. So yeah, I don't necessarily want to be adding, and I definitely don't want to be adding at the kind of rate that I can add. I don't necessarily want to be just working at the maximum pace. So yeah, we'll see how many rubles we can fit into this dead rat. Happy Blue Monday, Blue Monday week, and I'll catch you later. Bye.